Pokémon! You've played it, or you've at least heard of it. That doesn't matter, because in this video, I'll talk about which generation of games is the best. Let's run down some of the basics of Pokémon for the people who haven't played it. You start off each of the games in your designated region, which is something similar to a country or state that you live in. You choose between 3 starter Pokémon whose types will always consist of grass, fire, and water. You need to go around the region collecting gym badges from their leader in order to eventually face the champion and host becoming champion yourself. You might ask yourself, oh, what is a generation of Pokémon games? For simplicity's sake, I'll define a generation as a region of Pokémon. For example, the first generation was Pokémon Red and Blue, which takes place in the Kanto region. For the rest of the video, I'll just say the name of the region instead of the generation. There are currently 9 generations as of this video, and the names of each region in order goes as follows: Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, and finally, Paldea. Now let's get down to the meat and potatoes. Which of the 9 generations is the best one? As someone who's played all but the latest generation, I believe that I can make a fair and educated guess on which is the best. The best generation is Gen 5 of Pokemon, which takes place in the Unova region. This generation consists of 4 games: Black and White and its sequels, Black and White 2. For context, Pokemon Black and White was often seen as the oddball of the Pokemon franchise. People weren't a fan of how in the first game you couldn't have passed Pokemon until you beat the game, while some of the Pokemon designs were, quote, lazy. I'll come back to those 2 points later on, because I have something to say about them. But recently, people haven't been saying that. The whole community had a complete 180 from their opinions on the 5th generation. The reason why these games are the best is because they have some of the best designs for both people and Pokemon, their story is leagues above all the other stories, and lastly, because the music is some of the best in the series. Let's talk about design. One thing that's important in almost any work of fiction, Pokemon especially, is the design of its characters. But what makes a good design? Well, according to Marika Neimainen in her research paper, Psychology and Character Design, Creation of Character Design Tool, there are a multitude of things that can make a character stick out. Color palette, body language, and shape play a big role in what makes a character's design good or not. How about we look at some of the characters first? Let me introduce you to our first gym leaders in Black and White. Yes, leaders, plural. Depending on which Pokemon you start on your journey determines which of the 3 brothers you end up fighting. There's Silent, the grass-type gym leader, Chili, the fire-type leader, and Crest, the water-type leader. Given their appearance, I assume you can tell who's who. That's what makes the design of the gym leader so important. Being able to look at a gym leader and have an idea of what type of Pokemon they use can be a big help in battle. Now let's take a look at N. As weird as that sounds, that is his name. His role in the story is one of the main antagonists in Black and White. Neimainen also mentions that the way a character speaks can make them stand out, and that applies to N. One thing that stands out about N is his talking speed. The game has a text speed, which determines how fast the text of a character comes out. And with N, his talking speed is always going to be one setting above. This, along with the design, makes him stand out from most other characters in the game. N is a character that's supposed to be viewed as mysterious and not like other people. Now what about the Pokemon? That is the name of the game. I think one thing that Unova did great was make good sprites for the Pokemon. I was never really a fan of Pokemon's transition from a sprite-based game to a game with 3D models. Not that the models are inherently bad, but they just don't look as good. For this portion, let's take a look at some Pokemon who had a negative impact from 3D models. Take Excadrill, for example, a Pokemon native to Unova and one of my personal favorites. The sprite makes it look like a bulky Pokemon that can deal massive damage with its large metal claws. Now look at the model, and now we see a dopey mole. This made me upset. Look at how they massacred my boy. There's Typhlosion, a Pokemon who's native to Johto and Pokedex entry states, if its rage peaks, it becomes so hot that anything it touches will instantly go up in flames. With a description like that, the sprite matched it beautifully with the fire on its back resembling explosions and a pose looking like it's ready to attack. Now we look at the 3D model and honestly, it looks less intimidating. And finally, Haunter, a ghost Pokemon. In the sprites it has a red aura around it, and it's gone in 3D. That might not sound as bad until you realize its shiny form looks the same. What is a shiny Pokemon? A shiny Pokemon is a rare variant of Pokemon that is a different color from the same Pokemon of its species. The odds of finding one being 1 to 8,192, which is later changed to 1 to 4,096. Here's some general examples of shiny versus original colored Pokemon, but a shiny Haunter, its aura is changed to blue instead of red, and its tongue is blue as well. But without that aura, it's really hard to tell the difference between the two, so if you're not paying attention, you could lose out on a really rare Pokemon. So the design of Pokemon in Unova has some of the most updated sprites, and they're the better way of depicting Pokemon. Now let's talk about the story. All the previous Pokemon games had villains that were just copy and pasted from other villains. The goal of the villains back then was to steal Pokemon from people and take over the world. While taking over the world is something that's common for most villains, having this happen for multiple games gets kinda repetitive. Unova, however, was different. The heroes and the villains of this game aren't so black and white. The game starts off by choosing to play between two characters, Hilbert or Hilda. You can change their names to match yours, but you get the point. Later in the game, you meet Team Plasma. They have different goals compared to previous evil teams. Instead of stealing Pokemon, they want to free Pokemon. They believe that people and Pokemon should live separately. They're run by Ghetsis, the second main antagonist. He's introduced by giving a speech in the middle of town about Team Plasma and their ideals. While giving the speech, he has the crowd wondering if what he's saying is actually correct. And Ghetsis does bring up a good point about Pokemon. The series is about catching animals and make them do battle. Let's bring up Evan A. Poole's article, Heroes vs. Villains, into account, when he says, more stories are surfacing about the anti-hero, flawed, natural people who don't delude themselves into grandiose heroism. They simply fight for a goal, right or wrong. I think the anti-hero is a good way to describe Ed, not Ghetsis though. It's revealed later in the game that Ghetsis also plans on taking over the world, but the idea of separating people and Pokemon is to make it so that people can't fight back. And is opposed to this idea because throughout the game we battle Ed and befriend him, making him our rival rather than our enemy. While Ghetsis wants people and Pokemon to live separately as a means to control the population, Ed wants that because he feels for the Pokemon. He's able to understand him. No, literally, he can actually talk to Pokemon. The game ends with you catching legendary Reshiram or Zekrom, depending on which game you play, and battling N one last time. After hopefully defeating N, he learns that it's possible for people and Pokemon to get along, as he sees that your team of Pokemon genuinely cares for you. What makes Unova different from other Pokemon games is that there's a sequel to the game, so it takes place only 2 years from the main game. This time you follow our protagonists, either Nate or Rosa, as you find out Team Plasma, and by extension, Ghetsis, is back. They've dropped the whole, oh, please think of the Pokemon act, and now their goal is to catch the legendary Pokemon Kyurem in hopes to freeze all of Unova. Anne and our protagonists are nowhere to be found, and because of that, neither are Reshiram or Zekrom. This makes the goal of beating Ghetsis more difficult. You go around and battle gym leaders as normal until you make it to Opelucid City. You beat the gym there and see that Team Plasma has launched an attack to see how powerful Kyurem is, and they freeze the whole city. And Ghetsis has now switched from someone who you thought, hey, you might have a point about this whole Pokemon thing, to pure evil. At least the other villains in the Pokemon game didn't launch straight up terrorist attacks. They might have stolen some Pokemon or at worst made the weather really bad, but attacking a city with innocent people living there really shows that Ghetsis doesn't care who's in his way. Later in the story, you can finally confront Ghetsis with Kyurem, and he sends Kyurem to attack the player, not the Pokemon. Hope seems lost seeing that a giant ice dragon's about to freeze you to death, but N comes to save the player. That's what makes this game's story stands out. While other Pokemon games have their own stories, not directly connected to each other, Unova has something that continues the original story. Music is something that's also important for any piece of media. Music in video games is just as important. Rob Monday, in his article, Music in Video Games, says that music immerses people and heightens their senses by making them immersed. Music is a way to show tense, dramatic, exciting, or sad moments. Unova not only has some of the best music in the series, but also music that fits the setting as well. When battling, your Pokemon has health that lowers the more it takes damage. One thing that Unova has done that changed old Pokemon traditions was changing the low health theme from an annoying beeping to an actual song. Yes, it still has that beeping, but it's an actual song, and a good one too. While this song is good, the fast tempo really makes you think, ah shoot, I gotta heal. Or when fighting the gym leader, you get them down to their last Pokemon, and this song starts to play. I've played Black and White multiple times, at least 4 times, one for each of the games. I could be down to my last Pokemon with little to no help, but once I hear this song, I know that the gym leader is down to their last Pokemon too. And I have that chance to beat the gym. Has this song actually led me to victory consistently? Never mind that. Just hearing this song gives me hope. When battling Ghetsis, he has his own theme as well. When hearing it, you know you're up against the final boss. In the first game, his theme is more slow-paced and brooding, showing that you're up against a strong, calculating enemy. In the second game, when you fight him again, the tempo picks up, showing that he's kinda gone off the deep end and grown more evil. One thing I love in the Pokemon gyms, with Black and White 2 specifically, the songs are different, but they have the same motif. For example, Poison-type gym leader Roxy's theme is just a gym theme, but a live concert fashion, since she's a musician herself. There's the Bug-type gym leader Berg, whose theme sounds a little bit eerie since he's an artist that turned his gym into a giant art show about bugs and all their webs. There's Elisa, the electric gym leader slash fashion model whose theme is meant for the catwalk. This can be seen in all the gyms for this region, and it's never done again, which is kinda sad, because it's nice to hear all these little details change. Alright, now I've done plenty talking about Unova, but what about the other generations? This is what this last section about the video is, about the pros and cons of every other generation. Let's start with Kanto. It's the first Pokemon game to come out. Without it, Pokemon wouldn't be as big as it is today. But with it being the first game, there's bound to be some technical limitations which can be excused. I mentioned earlier that some people call the designs from Unova unoriginal. And I can kinda get where they're coming from. There's an ice cream Pokemon and a trash bag Pokemon, but Kanto isn't safe from this problem either. Let's look at Seal. I feel like I don't even have to put up a picture for you to guess what it is, because it's just a seal. Or its evolution, Dugong, which as you guessed, is just a different way of spelling Dugong. Next up is Johto. To me, it's not as iconic as Kanto, but hey, they brought color to Pokemon and expanded the world. I feel like the Pokemon in that generation aren't as iconic from Pokemon in the other generations, so that's really all I have to say about it. Hoenn's pretty good. They stepped up the villains from the previous generations. This made the stakes higher, and the Pokemon are recognizable in the community. I think this is about an average game, but not the best. Sinnoh is the closest to being as good as Unova. The music's amazing, Pokemon designs are great, and the story's good. However, there's one glaring weakness. The game is just so slow. Here, look at this. Now to be fair, Blissey has crazy high HP, but imagine having the health bar move that slow the whole game. Alright, Kalos is a pretty good game, but following up a game like Black and White is pretty hard. The new Pokemon they introduced were kind of okay. Like, some of them hit, but other ones, they're kind of forgettable. Alola is also a really good region. Story's good, has some of my favorite Pokemon, but the weakness for me is the removal of the gym system. Instead you do trials, or instead of fighting a gym leader, you just have to battle a Pokemon that's stronger than normal. Galar. Aw man, it is not good. I mentioned in the beginning that people didn't like how Unova didn't include every Pokemon in the beginning. They fixed this in its sequels, or if you really wanted to, you could just treat it from a friend from a previous generation. Now Galar just took this to a whole new level. They didn't code in all of the Pokemon. Some Pokemon were just given the boot. Game Freak, the company who makes Pokemon, had the excuse that they didn't want to make whole new models for all the Pokemon, but they lied. They just reused Pokemon models from Alola. And finally, Paldea. I haven't played this yet, and from what I've seen, I'm kind of glad. This is one of the buggiest games on the Switch. I mean, just look at this. This sucks. The game looks good, the Pokemon are interesting. There's 3 main stories you can tackle in any order, but quite frankly, it's not finished. The thing about Nintendo is that they don't have good hardware compared to the other companies like Sony or Microsoft, but they use what they can and they make it look amazing. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is one of the most visually stunning games, Mario Kart has smooth controls, Smash Bros. Ultimate is a fast-paced game, and Pokemon just fumbled that bag. There were high hopes, but all the glitches just made it a bad game. Kotaku, a publishing site that focuses on games and such, had this to say: Nintendo recognizes the state of the game is not okay. Again, infuriatingly vague, but at least an admission that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are a buggy old hodgepodge. Alright, enough about slandering other Pokemon games. Let's get back to the beginning. Generation 5 of Pokemon, which took place in Unova, is the best generation because of the characters and Pokemon design. The story is great and really makes you think. And lastly, the music just encaptures you and has you hooked. Thanks for watching, and peace.